I agree with what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. Stop agreeing with yourself. Stop agreeing with yourself.
Hello and welcome to Glass Half Full Reviews, the optimistic movie show, starring me. You know, the guy doing the show. So today I am going to be reviewing Zach Braff's Wish I Was Here. Oh, Zach Braff, is there anything you can do? Well, apparently so. Because, okay, let's get into that in a second. So, what's the deal with this movie? In this case, the movie came because Zach Braff had started a Kickstarter after the success of his first film, Garden State, which starred, I think, somebody Sarsgaard and Natalie Portman, and I really quite liked it. It kind of subtle energy. It wasn't afraid to be silent and kind of depressing at times, but sort of had an interesting way of thinking in an introspective way. A lot of people really praised the soundtrack. It was fine, as far as I was concerned. I didn't really find it that sensational or anything. So for me, that was never a particular draw. But then he wanted to make a follow-up. So what happens? He says he goes on Kickstarter and says, oh, I can make this movie. I can get the financial backing I need. But if I do, I'm going to have to listen to the studio give me all these notes. Like, hey, well, that one subplot is kind of stupid. Maybe you should cut it out. Or, maybe you should put up this dialogue. It's a little preachy. And he said, no, Zach Braff ain't gonna listen to no studio person if he can get money from people. So what does he do? He gets money. Enough money so that he doesn't have to take any studio notes. He gets to make first and final cut of the movie himself. So he writes the script, he shoots the script exactly the way he wants, without anyone else saying anything. He assembles a stellar cast, has a really great director of photography, and what happens? You get a little something disappointing. So, in Wish I Was Here, Zach Braff plays essentially the main character, this guy named Aiden, who comes from a religiously Jewish family, maybe. I mean, well, I wasn't really pleased with the portrayal. I just didn't find it that honest, or truthful, I suppose. But he's married to Kate Hudson, and he has two adorable youngsters, one whom is played by Joey King from things like White House Down, and the recent television show Fargo. She's great. Another one is Pierce Gagnon, who was great in the movie Looper, and he's also good in this new show Exted, which is not such a great show, but he's good in it. So you got two great kid actors. Zach Braff isn't a terrible actor at all, and Kate Hudson is pretty good too. He has his brother, who's sort of layabout, played by Josh Gad, and his dad, played by Mandy Patinkin. So as the movie starts, basically, his dad says, all right, listen, I'm not going to be able to afford to send your kids to private school anymore because I have cancer and I need to pay out of pocket for these experimental treatments. And so this is sort of like where the conflicts of the movie start up. And I had a big problem with a lot of things, but I'll get to that in a minute. So basically the kids are in this sort of very conservative, right-wing, really religious Jewish school called the Yeshiva. And they do exist. And there were definitely details that I thought were reasonably accurate the way it was portrayed, but not entirely. Now, basically the dad said, oh, I'm only going to pay if I get to choose which school they go to because they think that the public schools are terrible. It's their prerogative if they can pay for it. But now that they can't, he's like, well, I got to pull these kids out and got to give them a hilarious home teaching montage that shows how just terrible I am at teaching. Of course, that leads to something later in the movie about teaching that I feel like it almost makes no sense in the resolution, but I don't want to spoil it, I suppose, because this is supposed to be a spoiler-free review, but I will say that that particular reveal, that parallel did not make sense to me. Okay, so we have our conflict. Now, Aiden has to raise his kids, and his daughter is really gung-ho about the whole religious thing. She wears, very conservative clothing. She's kind of thinking, like, I really am into this really religious Jewish thing. The son is like, and it's so boring. And those two reactions totally make sense. I have known kids totally in those two realms. So that part was believable enough. But a lot of these other things didn't quite make sense. there's this whole subplot where his brother, the Josh Gad guy, he wants to make a costume for Comic-Con, and he wants to hook up with this attractive neighbor played by Ashley Greene, and the whole subplot is so stupid. So stupid. And it leads to some terribly weird, totally inconsistent scenes that I just thought were so out of place. It tried to add, I guess, humor to the movie, but it was just so weird out of the context of the rest of it. Because a lot of it gets kind of treacly and like, oh, everyone's so wise. But of course, the actual wise things they say are really not that wise at all. And this is the kind of thing that maybe someone taking a look at the script would say, this line isn't very believable. Maybe you should trim it a little bit. So, my positives about the movie are that everyone's good at the acting part. And Mandy Patinkin particularly shines there. I think that before I keep going up, might as well get into my 5-point breakdown.
5-point breakdown.
Alright, so as I was saying about the acting, there's no bad acting here. It really comes down to the bad writing that takes everything down, because everyone's doing a great job. Mandy Patinkin is really by far the best, but he gets really not great material, and his character is so weirdly written that it was really hard to care that he was going through such a traumatic time. I mean, he's sort of painted to be kind of a jerk of a father, but even with that, I'm like, well, I don't really buy it. I know it didn't ring true what they were trying to say. And I mean, Zach Braff is fine. Everyone's good. I mean, these are two of the most talented kid actors in Hollywood now, Joey King and Pierce Gagnon. And I just feel like they didn't get enough stuff. This was a movie that didn't take advantage of what it had. Which moves us on to number 2. This is where the movie really has a problem. The story is really kind of simplistic. It's all over the place from a very kind of indie way, like trying to be like, oh, let's have some scenes of trying to be life-affirming. And then you get the scenes of like questioning, and what is life about, and what is faith, and I can't find meaning in life. And it's not that these are bad questions, it's just that it's done in such a heavy-handed, unsubtle way, and then Zach Braff tries to have these weird visual metaphors with spacemen. Then it's like, well, they have a kind of cool look to them, but what's the point? And although I do understand, actually, what the point of it is, because later on he gets extremely heavy-handed and obvious with what he's trying to say. But it sort of falls out of sync with the rest of the movie. The story does not line up. Number 3. So actually, a big positive about this movie is that it does look really great. The scenes that are shot with the family give you a nice sense of intimacy. The ones that are shot outside have some very beautiful imagery of things in California. I really like that. The film looked great. Unfortunately, not everything else really matched up to that. I mean, I really do have to just blame the script on this one, because all the pieces were there for this to be a great movie. It just didn't hit that mark. Number 4. So, walked out of this theater and I thought, man, I really liked Garden State, but this seems like a worse version of the same kind of thing. Sure, it didn't have the whole Manic Pixie Dream Girl thing that people complain about with Natalie Portman, which I still think is overblown anyway. But that aside, I think that in this movie, it's just too much. There's just too much Zach Braffiness, for me anyway. It didn't fly. So for me, I didn't really care for it as I left the theater. Number 5. So, the interesting thing is that I don't really have a problem with the sort of auteur aspect of this. The director and writer, creator trying to make their own work and trying to remove it from the studio system. I think that's a cool idea. I don't begrudge him that. I just wanted to see something that worked. If it had been a success, I would have said, great, good job, man. You did the right thing with this. I mean, I didn't contribute to the Kickstarter because it wasn't really something I care about investing to. I think it would have been one of those things like, oh, if I really like this movie, maybe I'll buy it on Blu-ray or something. But as it stands, it's not going to happen. I just felt like it just didn't live up to its potential. I mean, you look at something like Veronica Mars, and I think that movie worked a lot better. And that doesn't mean really anything. I mean, it means that a Kickstarter movie could work fine. I don't know. It's hard to say how these things are going to go. get a feeling the studios are really going to get on the trying to take more money out of people so they don't have to pay as much for it themselves. But it's hard to say, because when it comes down to it, the cost of these movies tend to be so much higher than what you can really reasonably raise on Kickstarter. So it usually seems more like a proof of concept investment. Like, hey, look, all these people are clearly interested, so they're going to be interested in seeing it in the theater. And I guess that kind of makes sense. That moves on to my recommendation. Oh man, do I recommend this movie? And I gotta say, I don't really recommend this movie. And if you really like this kind of thing, I recommend just going to watch Garden State again. I still like that one. So, my recommendation, go see Garden State. I don't know if it's on Netflix, but you can probably find it. Thanks for stopping by.